If you were to speak from where you're comfortable, I mean, no. Somebody will. Okay. Hear us? Can somebody respond and say if they can hear us?
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent. So I think that's all we. Oh, is everyone in? Oh. Hi, everybody. Waving. Yuji and me in the back of the room.
Hello.
To the ERC advisory board meeting for February 20th. We'll give everyone just a second to get in. Your board member, please turn your camera on. Let me do see who's here. See how many board members. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 4. 7, 8, 9. Jen. Oh, wasn't Megan? Yeah, sorry, we have a call. All right, everyone. Okay, welcome to the ERC advisory board meeting. Before we start, just a quick announcement on the agenda posted to the register. The physical meeting place was 12.103, but we have moved to 12.102. We are next door. There's a sign. If anyone's on their way, you can find us. I just wanted to let everyone know. So, let's get started with agenda item 1, call to order, remarks, and I will take attendance really quickly. Yuji? Here. Celeste?
Here.
Kathy?
Here.
Holly? Rayon?
Here.
Hi. Linda Rosca?
Here.
Angie?
Here.
Jackie?
Here.
And Megan. Don't see her yet, but okay. Jackie's not here yet, but we do have a quorum, so we will move forward. Next item is public testimony. We did not have anyone register to give public testimony, so we will move on to the next item, which is consideration and possible action to approve minutes. The board received the minutes from the last meeting through email. Does anyone have a motion to approve last meeting's minutes?
This is Holly. I motion to approve.
I'll second Celeste.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes. Great, thanks. All right, and on to agenda item 4, consideration and possible action to approve new research project. So we'll get started with proposal 1, UH 101, including a remote access request, abortion access and women's educational and labor market outcomes. Do we have a researcher here to talk about this one?
Yes, I am. So
Hi, welcome.
my name is Jim Flynn. I'm an assistant professor of economics at Miami University. One of my co-authors is on the call as well. Another one is teaching the class right now. So I have a just quick spiel about the project. We plan to use the ERC's data on educational outcomes linked with wages and employment data to measure the effect of abortion restrictions in Texas on the economic lives of young women in the state. So we will begin by examining the effects of HB2, which caused nearly half the state's abortion clinics to close in 2013. So we will use the ERC data to estimate the impact of these closures on utilization of pregnancy-related services while in high school, as well as high school performance, high school completion, and then college applications, college performance, enrollment, completion, and then finally we'll follow women into the labor market and also track labor market outcomes, including industry sorting, employment, and wages. So because of the statistical power of the ERC's data sets, we will be able to precisely estimate heterogeneous treatment effects by race and ethnicity to understand precisely how different populations are impacted by possible abortion restrictions. So the main benefit this project will provide policymakers in Texas will be that by tracing out the full life course impacts of abortion restrictions which impacted West Texas in 2013, we will enable policymakers to predict and potentially prevent some of the same effects from taking place in the years ahead under the recent near total abortion ban, which is impacting a much larger portion of the state's population. So by getting a better understanding of exactly how different populations are going to be affected by recent bans, policymakers will be better equipped to offer policy solutions before any potentially harmful effects are fully realized.
Great, thank you. Questions and comments from the board?
Yeah, I read your proposal yesterday, and I was wondering if you could kind of unpack what those policy solutions that you just alluded to. How would that really what would those look like?
Yeah, and so I think a little bit this will somewhat depend on the findings that we have. So some research has already shown using public data in Texas that the 2013 restrictions have led to reductions in college completion. That alone is hard to have a policy prescription for because we don't understand exactly where in the life course young women are getting derailed from completing college. So for example, if it's a matter of not being able to complete high school or not being able to complete a high school equivalent, right, there could be potential ways that policymakers could come and offer solutions that would enable students to sort of get over that. So part of this depends on what we actually would find when we are able to unpack results, which I think is the real benefit of the amazing data that you all have, is that would allow us to trace out exactly how you get from an abortion restriction to reduced college completion. There's many sort of ways along the way. So we can understand if schools that have better counseling services, right, or more well-funded for counseling services, can ameliorate those impacts, right? So partially it's hard to say exactly what those policy solutions could be without a full understanding of where the reductions in college completion are coming from. So it's hard to say with certainty now, but I think that's something that this study would allow us to get to an understanding of.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that question though. I appreciate the detailed talk through, but it just makes me want to ask a little bit further because you mentioned I understand it depends on what you find, but kind of like specifically what data are you pulling in that you can use to look at whether something might mitigate a negative effect or kind of I understand, like you have to see what it looks like first,
Yeah.
but what I didn't read in here is kind of that more specific, like, are you looking at classroom policies that might affect it? Are you looking at teacher information? What is the specific piece of education that you might be able to speak to?
Yeah, and so we don't have any specific the only real data that we're trying to get into to merge in with the project is data on where abortion clinics were closed, which will help us to understand sort of what what schools, what students are impacted directly. So as far as specific policies that we'd be bringing in to test the impact of, we don't have any specific versions of that right now, aside from being able to understand where and sort of which schools are more directly or less directly impacted, in which case you'd be able to get an understanding of what are the characteristics of different schools or areas that make these impacts stronger or ameliorated.
Yeah, I understand that, but you are asking for lots of student level data that's beyond just where a school is located, for example.
Yeah.
That's very specific about a lot of outcomes. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is the only reason you need that data for the overall question, or is there some specific things you can learn from it?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I'm another researcher. So I think the big contribution is we may be the first project or first few projects that look at the impact of abortion access on labor market outcome. But that's the key outcome we are interested in. But at the same time, we want to understand why and how abortion access affect female students' long-term outcome. So it's important to estimate the impact on their test score, their high school graduation, and also their college enrollment. We think this is very important because we see a large gap in earning gap and employment by men and female. So I think, yeah, using the ERC data, so we can track the whole impact through when they are in school, their high school graduation outcome, college outcome, and long-term labor market outcome. This is why we request using those data.
Thank you.
Could you speak a little bit more on the FERPA exemptions on this study? Because when we look at studies related exemptions, it's more related to, I don't know, more specific programs or whatnot, but to improve instruction. But for this case, I wasn't sure if the FERPA exemption was to, I don't know, help with the abortion access clinics, or I guess I was lost. If you could speak more to that, please.
Yeah, so for the FERPA exemption, I think in this project, we will give implication for the policymaker to see how does the abortion policy, especially the distance to those clinics, about abortion service impact, especially women students' educational and labor markets outcome. So, for example, if our results show there is a negative impact, maybe the policymaker can provide some help and support and help those women, the students, to mitigate those adverse impact. Did I answer your question?
I'll let other board members ask. I'm
Thank
a
you.
little bit.
I guess I'm really having a hard time understanding how this project meets the mandate of the ERC, because it seems like this project is really focused on abortion policy, and not specifically education policy, because it doesn't seem as if at least in the proposal, that you have the data to kind of figure out where are the policy levers that teachers or policymakers can pull to improve education policy in Texas. I guess that's just my main concern. I'm not saying this is an interesting study.
Mhm.
I'm just having a hard time seeing how it fits within the mandate of the ERC.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we just focus on we are very focused on the educational team outcome and the labor market outcome. And here so we're interested to see, for example, what caused the gap in education and labor market outcome between men and female. So abortion access policies only create a variation that we using the distance to the clinic. Yeah. So using this as a variation to understand how this policy could contribute to the gap in education and labor market outcome between men and female. And we think this is very important because a lot of statistics show that like high school female students, they're very likely to be pregnant. So if they get pregnant, so this may, and they do not have like abortion access, this may increases the likelihood to drop out of school and stop going to college. So in this study, we are able to study whether this is true and how big is the impact side on the educational attainment outcome and the labor market outcome.
And it also has the potential to help policymakers target specifically where they want to pull policy levers in order to potentially ameliorate kinds of impacts. Like we're saying, if we know that there's this big gap that's taking place somewhere between abortion access and education labor market outcomes, by understanding exactly how things are falling off the tracks. For example, if it's has something to do with finishing high school but not having the bandwidth to take SATs and apply broadly to colleges or to leave and go college out of town, like policymakers understanding that would then be able to try to offer policy solutions that are much more targeted to be able to address the specific needs that are being met, as opposed to just not understanding anything more fine-grained in the big picture, that we know that this is changing young women's college completion. Like understanding exactly where things are falling off the tracks is vital for policymakers who want to offer specific solutions.
And also, this project is interesting because we do not have a lot of a study about this. So, for example, if for our research, we do not find any impact on students' outcome. Like students' educational attainment outcome does not matter with the distance to the abortion access. They also provide implication for the policymaker.
Other questions or comments from the board? Other board members?
Variable you're using to control whether or not being able to get an abortion affected their educational outcome is their location or proximity to a clinic?
Yeah, that's right. So we know which county the student are in, right? So and from the supplemental data, so we kind of have information about the distance of the center of the county to the closest clinic. So basically, we use the county that the student attending school to match with the county information about the distance to the clinic.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's just too broad. So if you do find, let's say you do find there is like statistical significance and, that the educational outcomes have changed, is that criteria specific enough to think that's what did it?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
a
so
great, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
Just, I don't want us to make like, spurious connections.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, that could certainly be part of it, but is that rigorous enough?
Yeah, so
That's what
yeah,
call.
that's yeah. Thank you for this question. So, because in the data we also know like the location of the school. So using the latitude of the school and longitude of the school, so we can have a better calculation the distance of the school they, for example, they attend high school to the closest clinic.
And so to build onto our identification strategy is not, just built on looking for a change in outcomes in one specific group over time. We'll be part of a difference in differences set up where we'll have other control counties that we're looking for that are going to be similar on as many, confounding variables as possible, where they're evolving similarly over time all the way prior to 2013, and then we're going to look at what's changing for both men and women in 2013. Most of this research finds that impacts of abortion restrictions mostly fall on young women. There's some effects on young men too, but if we're comparing two sets of counties, one with abortion restrictions and one without, and the men have similar outcomes that are evolving very similarly over time. But when we look at the women, if there's a change that happens for women in the abortion restricted counties directly at the same time as the abortion policies go into effect, I think we'll feel much more confident that we've found an actual causal effect of these restrictions, as opposed to just looking for a correlation over time. So we have a number of different identification strategies that we'll be implementing to really make sure that we found a causal effect and not just a change that's happening over time. Because we do understand that the counties that were most severely restricted in 2013, largely in West Texas, are not immediately comparable to the urban counties in the Triangle or other areas. So we will go to great lengths to make sure that we're finding appropriate comparisons, right? That and making sure that we're
sounds
we're
good.
controlling for as many things as possible.
Yeah,
This is a great question. It's really
sounds
important
better.
to make sure that we have an actual causal estimate. So.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I kind of want to get back to what has been brought up before, though, is I think what's hard for some of us to make the connection that specifically what we are, evaluate proposals for the ERC have to do with the educational benefit to Texas and meeting FERPA requirements, exemptions. And again, not to say the study is not important, but I think right now it's unclear, like the specifics. You're asking for a lot of very specific student data that is not clear right now in the proposal what it means to what you're looking for. Like it's kind of caught in the research question 1, which is like educational attainment. But what I'm hearing you say is that depending on what you find for all sorts of things, because you're asking for data for test scores, for course outcomes, for all sorts of things, like those are more specific possible education policies, and you are asking for data to look into that. But I think at least I'm having trouble making that clear connection to how those specific pieces and that specific data that you will have access to plays into your questions, rather than it just being like, we're going to look at everything we can and see what sticks, which I don't think is what it is, because you're explaining it. But I'm having trouble making that connection based on what you've written.
Yeah, I understand your concern. I hope I can just use like a high school graduation as an outcome variable and then publish the paper. But especially for economics paper, so they require a lot. So except for like looking at the effects on high school graduation. So the referee is special, and also the editor, they may require a lot. So how does it impact like other intermediate outcome like test score? So it's possible that you find effect on high school graduation, but no effect on test score. If just based on the effect on one outcome variable, so the result, the effect is not inclusive. This is why we request like the data on test score, high school graduation, and we further check the impact on the long-term outcome like coverage, whether the impact continue to affect them in the long run.
Yeah, and to build on that too, G's bringing up the case of what if we find an impact on high school graduation, but not on test scores. I mean, the inverse is quite possible too. What if we find that high school graduation is going similarly, but the test scores are really suffering, which reduces the likelihood of getting into a more selective school, which on its own would reduce these long run outcomes. We know that there's this.
Yeah.
But like that would be a specific policy that by finding a way to offer test improving services for particularly for young mothers or for even young potentially low income groups in general could go a long way to reducing that large decrease in college completion that we know exists. So part of our study is trying to dissect this big impact that we know is out there, and it is hard to say exactly which specific policy would be best in response to it without being able to do the piece that will diagnose, I think, the where these disparities are coming from. So I understand that that's somewhat unsatisfying with what you're asking, but I think there are lots of ways in which this does turn into very specific policy levers.
Yeah, any other board members have thoughts on?
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm belaboring on this point, but I would really like kind of a paragraph or 2 paragraphs specifically outlining what, let's say, a person down in Austin in the Senate Education Public School Committee, how could they use the information from your study to change policy? I don't think it's like I said, it's a really, I think it's an interesting, question. It helps us better understand the impacts of restriction, abortion access on outcomes. Yes, absolutely. But I like Melissa said, I'm having a hard time really understanding how results from this study, and I know you haven't conducted the research, so it's kind of hard to kind of figure out what those levers are. Really making that link to changes that could happen on the ground and in policy. Like I just didn't see that in the proposal, and kind of that's the mandate of the ERC is to leverage evidence to inform change, and I don't see that in the proposal.
Yeah, that's a great question. So because the variation we use is based on the distance to the clinic, for example, if it really depends on the result. For example, if our results show that this policy only have impact on the educational attainment outcome on the student, like the school that's within 10 miles to the clinic and no effect further away, then that means, so it's important for the taxer and policymaker to provide more help to those female students attending school within this 10 miles to the clinic. And I know Texas kind of have the service, some service and support for those teenagers, especially female get pregnant. For example, giving them more time and extra support to help them finish their high school and improve their educational attainment outcome.
And G, if I could build on that a little bit, specifically thinking about sort of what the person in Austin who may or may not want to know or why they might want to know the results of the study, right? So one of the reasons why we're really focused on these 2013 restrictions is because we believe that that's largely going to be a roadmap for what's going to happen with these more recent bans, right? So we know that in the long run, there are a lot of things that have happened because of the 2013 restrictions. We now have much more recent, much larger scale restrictions that are impacting a much larger part of the population of the state. So by understanding the mechanisms through which the 2013 restrictions led to much worsening educational outcomes, right, that can allow policymakers to understand what to expect to happen because of the restrictions that have recently happened with Dobbs, and knowing what to expect there would be half the battle in setting up policy to enable to ameliorate or prevent the same things from happening. So like the biggest benefit to the study for a policymaker is, it's almost like getting to be in a time machine, go 10 years ago, and see what's going to happen when these most recent bans restrictions went into place. Right, it really will provide a roadmap for what to expect to happen to particular types of communities because of the bans that just went into place in the last couple of years.
Melissa,
Yeah,
may
I
I
guess-
summarize what I hear happening and make a suggestion?
I'm sorry, Kathy, I just have to
Oh, I'm
step,
sorry, Anne, I apologize.
just wanted to let everybody know. I'll be back.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Ryan. Go ahead.
Melissa, yeah, I was just gonna, I hear, what I hear sort of cycling again and again is that there is I think there's a need for the proposal to come back to kind of pull on Holly's last comment, to put in narrative some of what's being surfaced in generalities here in conversation and in some specifics. And that's an important addition to the proposal from its current form to be able to move forward for consideration. So I would recommend, given the discussion we've had, that we table it and let the researchers go back and add that to their proposal for reconsideration.
Let's we'll talk about the motions because we have since last week, I know we tabled, that's not probably the best
Tabling is
one.
no longer an
When we
option.
want someone to come back with revisions, right? But I want to just I appreciate the researchers so much having this conversation with us. I mean, again, I think several of us have said, like, we agree this is important work, but we need to make sure it fits exactly within the requirements of the work that goes through the ERC. And we understand, so many of us are researchers or have been researchers, that you don't know what you're going to find. But in these proposals, but that's true of all the proposals that come through the ERCs. And so there's still lots of room here to be more specific about why you need all of this very sensitive educational data for your question. And you've already had we've had lots of good conversation about it, but I don't think we got that from the proposal is what we're saying. So being very clear about how these, like, beyond, and some of them, it's true, we understand some are controls, right? But not all of them. Some of them could very well speak to actual policies, and you've done a good job of explaining that just here. So I think that's a big piece of it, is like making sure it's clear why all of this data, this very sensitive data, is needed for your study, and how then that kind of helps lead to what Holly was saying, is that helps with that narrative, so we can be specific of saying, like, yeah, here's some things that policymakers could get out of this, because we're looking at
so some hypothetical situations, I guess, would be helpful, right? To say, like, suppose that we find this particular scenario, right? This would enable policymakers to do this, this, and that. So suppose we find this specific thing here. Some iteration of that, I think, would be helpful.
You could do that. I think also in just the write-up of what you're doing, explaining we're looking at educational policies that we will be looking at, because you're asking for the data so you can do it. But even just being clear about that, when really the only specific thing you've mentioned in the proposal, I think, was, like, graduation and attainment. But, like, you are getting the data, or you're asking for the data for a lot of things that I think could just be incorporated into your research, how you're writing up what you're doing with your research, that right now is just kind of all glossed over. Like, we're just asking for education data. And so any other thoughts from the board? I think those things lead into, being clear about how it's a benefit to, or like what a policymaker can get out of it, and also improving that purpose statement where you say it could improve instruction. It meets that exemption to improve instruction because we know we're looking at all of these various things that we could maybe talk to with the data that we're asking for. Holly, did that cover some of what you were getting at as well? And Yuji, I know you.
Yeah, no, I think what you said captures kind of my concerns. Is, I don't know if, the results that could stem from the study could change advising, instruction. Like I don't really know. And then, another question that I was thinking about was like, let's say a student has or wants an abortion, like schools are not going to get that information. Students are not probably going to provide that information. So I'm just trying to think through, the potential policy implications of this research, given how sensitive this topic is, particularly in a state like Texas, So I know I'm just thinking off the top of my head about this project. So
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from the board before we put out motions? Okay, so I think the options we have, and Kathy, I'm sorry I stopped that, but we since discovered that technically tabling isn't the right way if we are saying it should come back with some new things. So our options are, I think approve with amendment is not appropriate because this is pretty large changes. We could approve subject to the chair rereading it and approving, and then decline as submitted with the option of resubmitting. And of the board.
I know we've done before, the option to resubmit with the chair approving it. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
I don't know if I can have, I'm looking at legal in the room, because I think we're trying to be pretty precise with this. I think I appreciate having the board officially being part of the conversation.
Yeah, that would be fine as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with either option.
But other board members, please.
With the sensitivity of the subject, and also based on the discussion of the board members and the researchers, I would propose decline and then submit at the next or the future meetings. Is that the right way to do it?
I think it's decline with the option to resubmit. Again, this is open to all board members to comment on.
I think that makes sense.
I'm okay with that as well.
So do I have a motion to decline as submitted with the option to resubmit?
I move the motion. This is Yuji.
I second. This is Jackie.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I abstain just because I had to step away.
Thank you. That was Ram. Thank you. Okay, then motion passes. Thank you so much to the researchers for the conversation. We encourage you to come back. Thanks.
Thank you.
Proposal 2, including remote access requests UH 102, outcomes of proprietary colleges and healthcare professions, the case of the College of Healthcare Professions. Case of the College of Healthcare Professions, sorry. Any researchers here to talk about?
Yes, ma'am. This is Adem Ekmekci. I'm from the
Welcome.
Rice University School Mathematics Project. I'm the director of research here, and I'm a clinical associate professor
Great.
At the Rice University, and I have my graduate research assistant with me on the call today. So we'd like to look at the outcomes of proprietary colleges in healthcare profession. A specific case of the College of Healthcare Professions, which is a key player in healthcare education and training in the state of Texas, We are requesting data to study the impact of CHCP programs on student graduation and job placement rates, as well as their economic mobility in comparison to public institutions. So we are requesting PHECV data, student level data from 2015 to current, student enrollment and graduation rates data, financial aid database, student level data, again within the same time frame, last 10 years, and the Texas Workforce Commission individual level data within the same time frame. The understanding of the impact of proprietary healthcare institutions on higher education students, both in terms of education and financial well-being, will help secondary students and their families and irregular students, which are adult learners, make informed decisions about their post-secondary and continuing education. Since the larger set and unpacking the extent to which these proprietary healthcare colleges contribute educationally, socially, and financially, will shed light on these on some controversies against the effectiveness of for-profit career colleges. And we will use multi-level logistic regression analysis to compare the public institutions and the CHCP student outcomes. And we will also look at the return on investment between the public institutions and CHC. That
Thank
was a
you.
quick overview.
No, that's great. We appreciate it. Questions or comments from the board for the researcher?
Yeah, I have just a couple of notes. You asked for a specific hire date and education information if that was in the wage data, but neither of those fields are there. Also for the FERPA statement, you said that this was for audit, I think audit evaluation, which is for publicly, so state, federally funded programs. What it looks like the main thing you're evaluating is a for-profit school. You are comparing it to public, comparable public schools. So I'm not sure, does that still fit the audit evaluation criteria, or should it go under studies? And that's more for the board, not you, the researcher.
Right. Yeah, I was like, I don't know how to answer that. Your first question, though, you said one of the categories is empathy.
Yeah, I think you had asked for the wage data. If it was available, education information, like what degree, what grade levels they had, and the date they started a job, but neither of that's available in that information.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I just wasn't sure if, because the main thing they are evaluating is a for-profit school, if that fits under the audit evaluation FERPA statement, even though they are comparing it to public, so that may get it in.
Yeah, good call out, Angie. I think you're right that the audit requires that it's federal or state supported education program. So,
But don't they, correct me if I'm wrong, don't they receive financial aid? Don't some of their students receive financial aid?
Yes, they do.
Federal
But-
financial aid?
they do, is that?
Would that be enough to do it, though?
I'm not sure. Would it have to be, if that's the case, would it have to be an evaluation of the financial aid itself? Since that is what is. Yeah, that's our. Okay, yeah, it seems like since that is the only piece that's supported is through aid, it might have to focus on aid, but we can do more research on that as well. But then also we could think through whether the studies exemption could also fit. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if we just needed to change it to studies, if it would still fall into that.
While we look into this, do any other board members have questions for the researcher about?
Yeah, I guess one question I had is whether the researchers will bring in supplemental data to identify which students attended the for-profit.
We were thinking that it will be available in the data set because I think I don't know, I can't remember exactly what the prefixes means, but there are some data files that come from C underscore, which is community colleges, I think. There's H underscore, which is right. So we were thinking that it would be possible for us to identify what students attended which type of schools, like private, for-profit, nonprofit, or public institutions.
And Melissa, I forgot. I know there's a for-profit data file, right?
We do have career school.
And that's
Data.
at the student level and it can identify the college, the for-profit college.
It could, but it should, I mean, I checked it last night too, and I need to double check again. But I don't think I saw College of Healthcare.
We did a quick check, I mean, double check, UG, but we
Mhm.
did a quick check when the proposal went in and
Okay.
thought this was
Was it in the-
feasible.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
in the career school.
But-
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Here's another thing though, even if the College of Healthcare Profession data is not available in your data sets, the college is agreed to provide that data to us. So that could also answer, like a supplemental data we can bring in from the College of Healthcare Professions directly.
But I wouldn't start with that. I
No,
mean, that's a separate.
Yeah, that's the backup plan. No.
We could bring that in for an additional data,
Additional data, yeah. And then, I mean,
like later, if that's necessary, is what I'm hearing. Like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
and we did get confirmation. Okay. As long as the school is getting Title IV aid, then it can fall under the audit evaluation. So
Okay.
I think we're good there. Thank you. You look at all of this real time action. Okay. Any other questions from the board?
And for the remote access, are you seeking just yourself accessing remotely, or because I saw that
Myself
were-
and my graduate research assistant. 2 people.
the remote access
Who's-
form needs to be updated.
I
to
can,
include-
that's my fault, UG. I can do
Oh,
that.
it's fine. It's fine. I'm just pointing out, Kathy.
Burak, you want to peek in, say hi? My graduate assistant.
Sure. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yes.
All right. Other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, then do I have a motion to approve this proposal, including remote access? With amendment to add a name to the remote access form, right? Linda, is that what you were doing? Okay.
I move to approve with the addition of the added name.
Ollie, I motion to approve as well.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you all very much. Good afternoon.
All right. Proposal 3, including remote access request UH 103, strengthening the Texas teacher workforce, understanding the impact of state and local merit pay policies on teacher recruitment, retention, and effectiveness. We have researcher here to talk to us about this one.
Good afternoon.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you for considering our proposal.
This project seeks to provide the first evaluation of the Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment Program beyond Cohort A, which my team has evaluated as part of another research project. Just a heads up, I am aware that one of the data sets we are requesting is the new TIA data indicators that are coming. I know they are not available yet, but we can get started on evaluating this. So we have three key questions. What are the characteristics of TIA designated teachers, their students, their districts, and how do they compare to non-TIA teachers and educators involved in other workforce initiatives? What is the impact of TIA on the outcomes that you see there in the title, including also absenteeism and post-secondary success of students? And then how does TIA compare to other teacher workforce policies, such as residency programs and grow your own initiatives? We will use the ERC data to track trends in teacher mobility, student outcomes, and district staffing patterns. We're going to employ a variety of descriptive and quasi-experimental methods, depending on the research question, including the synthetic control method and advanced difference and differences model. These approaches allow us to isolate TIA's impact by comparing participating districts with non-TIA districts that are otherwise similar. Texas has made a substantial investment in TIA to attract and retain high-quality educators. Governor Abbott announced teacher pay as one of his emergency items, and just hours ago, Representative Buckley filed House Bill 2 and Senator Creighton filed Senate Bill 26, both of which would provide historic levels of investment in teacher compensation, including additional funds for TIA. However, we need to know more about this program. By doing so, our findings will provide state and district leaders and policymakers with knowledge on the extent to which TIA is improving student learning, supporting the teacher pipeline, and how it interacts with other staffing strategies. By understanding this effectiveness and limitations, this research will help refine compensation policies to better support teachers and improve outcomes for Texas students. Moreover, we are excited to continue our conversations with stakeholders involved in policy advocacy, TEA, and researchers to learn more about TIA's impact on Texas students and teachers. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
I had a question, Melissa. Jacob, could you talk a little bit about the early childhood analysis you'll be conducting?
Yeah, so TIA is one of the only merit pay policies that allows essentially anybody who has teacher of record to be eligible for TIA, including some early childhood programs. And so we are interested in those data for those TIA teachers, as well as additional factors related to early childhood characteristics of students and how that may be confounding variables and important to control for in later grades.
I didn't know if that needed to be I didn't really see that reflected in the research questions, and it's maybe that I don't quite understand some aspect of that analysis. But I was just trying to make sure I understood your request for the early childhood data.
So early childhood falls under TIA for educators to be designated. So I think that's one piece. So thinking about the retention elements, but then also, I believe listed in the table, we talk about that as just accounting for other characteristics of students that aren't related to TIA, just as we would, for example, like lagged achievement or lagged discipline or absenteeism.
How are you going to identify the grow your own teachers?
Grow your own programs, like particular universities or like school districts that get awarded grow your own grants. That is publicly available. So you can go on TEA's website and look at districts who've received grow your own grants. And so that would be something that we could easily just pull.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, sorry. Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve proposal 3, including remote access?
This is Rayan. I move to approve.
Yeah, this is Angie. I second.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions. Appreciate it.
Proposal 4, including remote access request UTA 259, the consequences of competition in higher ed on grading policies and labor market outcomes. We have a researcher here to talk about this one.
Yes, hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for considering our proposal. My name is Angela Crema. I'm a postdoctoral associate at the Yale School of Management and soon assistant professor at the University of Rochester. This proposal was submitted jointly with Pierre Bauderet, my colleague, who is about to join once he's done with teaching. So in this project, we are interested in exploring grading policies in higher education, by which we really mean the mapping between the actual performance, the level of knowledge accumulated by a student, and the grade that the student obtains within the university and program of attendance. In particular, we are interested in asking 2 categories of questions. First, do the grading policies that different universities adopt depend on the level of competition, on the competitive incentives for students that such universities face within the area within which they are located? And second, what are the implications of this relation between competition and grading policies for outcomes we care about, such as graduation, GPA, and labor market outcomes, thanks to the uniqueness of the depth of the ERC data? So to make these 2 types of questions more concrete, let me mention that the first question, what's the relation between competition and grading policies, can be justified if we think that students might value grades per se on top of learning, of actual learning, and colleges might respond to these preferences on the student side to maximize, to retain their enrollment. And so the way in which we think about exploring this relation in the data is to exploit college openings that have occurred in Texas since the 90s and can be tracked in the data, to see whether colleges located closer to these openings and thereby exposed to a higher level of competitive pressure would change their grading policies differently from otherwise similar colleges that happen to be less exposed. For the second category of questions, what does this mean for educational and labor market outcomes? We have a broad range of potential effects in mind that we are interested in exploring. For example, a more lenient grading approach might increase graduation rates, but it might make it harder for employers to interpret the grade and therefore induce employers to rely on other characteristics to make hiring decisions. And so to understand whether a given grading policy is relatively desirable or not in terms of longer-term outcomes, we plan to develop an equilibrium model where we study, on the one hand, how students make choices, how they choose colleges, given the distance from home, the price, and potentially the grading policy they would face. And on the other side, how colleges respond to these preferences when they decide on these strategic dimensions. And the model is really what would allow us to do policy evaluation along these lines. I'd like to mention that we think this project could contribute to the Texas education policy, given 2 recent trends, one being the call from the labor market side for more STEM graduates. It has been shown that particularly severe or restrictive grading approaches in STEM might deter enrollment in these majors, in these paths, jointly with the recent closures of colleges due to declining enrollment that might make competition more of a problem, of an urgency for colleges. So we see this project as building on these 2 recent trends and try to improve the link from higher education to the entry in the labor market, which we see as a critical step. If I may, I'd just like to conclude by saying that my co-author and I would like, if possible, and of course, if accepted, to add the financial aid database information data set to our request. That would help us understand how students choose colleges on the demand side. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments from the board? I have a quick question. I want to make sure. In the FERPA exemption, I'm not sure it specifies, it says studies, but I'm not sure it specifies which one of the allowable studies exemption. I assume it would be improve instruction, but maybe I missed that specific language and just want to make sure that it gets documented correctly.
Thank you.
Other board members, did you see it? I may have missed it, but okay. So yeah, I think that's something we can put in an amendment. Just making sure to document that.
Thank you.
And then you did mention you would like to request the FAD data. Could you say, I heard you say to help identify student choice. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
I would love to. Thank you for the question. There are two main reasons why those information would really help us. The first being when we try within the model framework that we described to understand how students choose among colleges nearby. One of the dimensions that we consider critical is the price, the tuition they face. And so knowing something more at the institution and hopefully at the program level about this effective price they would face and any financial aid information would help us capture the trends, the enrollment patterns, and the preferences more accurately. The second reason is that we think of colleges as competing along both dimensions, so both in terms of these grading policies as well as on tuition, which is something to which students respond. And so being able to have some information to document in the raw data, even model-free, what the relation is between these two margins, we think would make our modeling choices more compelling and more grounded in the data.
Thank you for walking through that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Great. If there are none, do I have a motion to approve with the amendment to add detail to the FERPA statement and add FAD data to the request?
Holly, I motion to approve, provided that the researchers make those two revisions to the proposal.
Have a second?
Kathy, a second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much for your feedback. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to proposal 5, including remote access requests UTA 260, Teach for America Corps members, and alumni impact in Texas. We have someone here to talk to us about this project.
Yes, hi, this is Dylan Farmer. I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'll give a quick overview. The goal of this study is to estimate the impact of TFA trained teachers on student achievement in Texas. We will be requesting access to data files that contain student, teacher, school, and district level information for the purposes of our models, which I'll describe. Essentially, we are going to be comparing TFA taught students to students taught by teachers trained through any other means other than TFA. Our geographic focus for this is going to be 5 regions where TFA is active in their core member assignments, and that would be Austin, Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, the Rio Grande Valley, and San Antonio. Our outcome of interest for this evaluation is the STAR assessments, And we are going to use propensity score weighting and multi-level modeling to estimate effects. TFA as an organization has trained thousands of educators across Texas. There are current core members, again, across those 5 regions that I mentioned, but their alumni are working statewide, and they're an avenue for accelerated teacher certification and filling teacher workforce needs. Our group at SMU, our Center on Research and Evaluation, has been studying TFA teacher effectiveness since 2019, but our data access has given us a lot of limitations in how we were able to conduct this work. And so that is our reason for reaching out to the ERC. We think this work is important because clearly Texas school districts have kind of this two-pronged issue of growing student populations in tandem with critical teacher shortages. Texas is the 3rd youngest state in the nation and had the largest population growth for children of any state in the last couple of years. And simultaneously, enrollment in traditional teacher prep programs, especially post-COVID, has decreased by 45%, according to some reports. And so this is just kind of the reality that we're living with right now. There's a lot of vacancies for school districts across the state, and more of the newcomers that are arriving into the teaching profession are coming through non-traditional pathways. And so we think there's a lot of merit in understanding how these programs, specifically TFA, but also alternative certification programs, kind of using TFA as our reference point, are kind of filling those voids in ways that are impactful and demand. Our needs are for data. Like I said, we're going to be requesting student level data, that's state level, but also demographics, enrollment, as well as teacher level demographics and teacher certification. And we'll also collect school and district level data so that we have nesting and context data for understanding the results. We're going to request creation of a supplemental data file that we'll work with Teach for America to provide to the ERC that will allow us to match which teachers were trained by TFA. We already have a master services agreement between SMU and Teach for America that allows for this work. And for our methods, we're going to be using propensity score weighting combined with multi-level modeling. We'll use that weighting to derive comparison groups. And then those weights will be used in our models for our outcome analysis. And then we will use 3-level, multi-level linear models with students nested within teachers, nested within schools to estimate our treatment effects. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Quick note, similar to the last one on page 11 in the FERPA exception section, we need to be specific about which studies exemption it is. And I'm assuming it's improve instruction specifically, but that needs to be documented.
And that would be for the study exemption?
Yes, like within the studies exemption, there are specific possibilities that it can hit when it has to do with registering predictive tests or student aid or improve instruction. And so
which one? I think we were also assuming that this would meet the evaluations exemption because TFA is federally funded. They're AmeriCorps funded. All of the core members are AmeriCorps. So I don't know if since we're stating both, I need to be specific with the study exemption, or can the evaluation one suffice?
I would say even if the evaluation one suffices, it needs to be specific about that, using that. Yeah.
We could just add improves instruction. That would be enough.
Correct.
Okay. Will do.
So Celeste, you'll take care of that? Or is there something I need to do?
I mean, I can just add it and send it back in. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Right, if there are none, do I have a motion to approve with the amendment to add this, the specifics about the FERPA exemption?
This is Jackie. I move to approve.
Okay. Have a second?
It's Holly and I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you for being here today.
Appreciate y'all's time. Thank you so much.
Right, proposal 6, including remote access, UTA 261, the impact of DACA on juvenile and school safety. We have a researcher here to talk about this one.
Yep. So, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Barbara Lundeberg. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in the economic department at Tulane University, and I'm really excited to be presenting my proposal to you guys today. So, as the slide beautifully says, right, my project is titled "The Impact of DACA on Juvenile Crime and School Safety." DACA, as I'm sure most of us are aware, is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that was started in 2012. DACA provides temporary protection from deportation as well as temporary work authorization for undocumented individuals who arrived in the United States before the age of 16. And in order to receive DACA, individuals have to meet a set of very strict eligibility requirements, and these criteria is the impetus for this project. So, along with residency length and age requirements, there's two main criteria that undocumented individuals have to meet that are kind of the drivers behind this project. The first is that individuals have to be currently in school, have graduated high school, earned a GED, or been honorably discharged from the military. And the second is they must not have any felony convictions, multiple serious misdemeanor convictions, or otherwise deemed as a threat to national safety or security. Taken together, these criteria increased the cost of crime for undocumented individuals and also increased the returns to education. So my project really seeks to understand if these changing incentives actually caused a behavioral change for students. So my two main research questions in this project are, did DACA deter juvenile crime? And second, did DACA decrease student misbehavior, which I'll specifically look at suspensions and expulsions in order to measure that. Similar to another ERC project, which is Monarez 2017. I seek to use the immigrant flag in the Texas ERC data to proxy for likely DACA eligibility. This flag obviously is not documented status, but it does proxy for the population that will be most likely impacted by DACA and will help me better identify the individuals who are treated by the DACA program. My methodology is a difference in difference strategy that again compares those treated by DACA, i.e. those individuals marked as immigrants, to those who are not treated by DACA, which is likely U.S. citizens, before and after the rollout to DACA, in order to determine, again, if the program had real behavioral impacts on students. Lastly, I want to highlight that there are three main benefits to this project, or benefits of this project to Texas education. First, Texas is home to the second largest undocumented population, and in the 2022-23 school year alone, there was over 115,000 students labeled as immigrants. This means that DACA may have had a very significant impact on a large portion of Texas students. So understanding how the program impacted their behavior is incredibly important. Second, the finding of this research can be used to inform the future creation and tailoring of disciplinary and student support policies. So like I mentioned, this project really wants to understand if providing explicit criteria in order to get a benefit, i.e. DACA, changed student behavior. That information can be used to create effective disciplinary policy in the future, right? By baking in some of this criteria into a potential award or reward to make sure that students behave. And then finally, these findings can help to inform resource allocation to better serve students who are in need of support while maintaining a high standard for school safety. And I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. We have questions or comments from the board for the researcher.
Yeah, I just have one comment regarding the proxy data that you'll be using to estimate the DACA students. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but I just want to say, make sure in any final papers that that is definitely clearly explained, that you can't know for sure. That's them. It does seem more likely they're going to be in those groups. I think it was two flags, two like flag fields that you could use.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can't know for sure.
Right.
So that is really clear.
Right, right. And I think that that's really important, right? And one of the benefits of using the Texas ERC data is most literature that have studied DACA before, they used the regional variation of DACA applications, which if we're looking at students who are too young or have potentially like don't meet all of the criteria, using DACA applications can potentially miss some of the big impacts that we might see on younger kids. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing, and definitely will make it very clear that these flags do not mean documented status. It's just a proxy, and very like specifically say it is a proxy for the population that'll be most impacted.
And I don't mean to imply that I don't think you were going to, because you did in the proposal. That's my 2 cents to put out there.
No, I think that's really important. I appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the board? I have one that in our look, it didn't seem that DACA was actually a federally funded program.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure that that FERPA exemption can apply here. Do you have?
I had thought that because it was the federal government that rolled out DACA, and it's the federal government that applied or not applied, implemented DACA, that it did fit the FERPA exception.
It's federal or state supported education program, and this is not really an education program. So I think not sure this fits. Also, I don't think they're funding it either. It's funded by the people applying.
Mm-hmm.
But also that's not, it is a federal program, yes, but it's not an education program per se. So I think I'm going to think about, is there possibly another FERPA exemption that this could fall under?
So I had the way I was thinking about it, right, is that yes, it's not labeled an education program, but because of the criteria that in order to get DACA, they have to be in school or have graduated from school. In my mind, I had thought, right, that this falls under an education program because it has very real implications for education, just because it's one of the stated criteria.
So Melissa, did the attorneys have something different to say? Because we could.
I'm just asking right now.
Well, okay, because changing discipline issues or whatever, that actually might improve instruction, I suppose, if there's less discipline, you could.
Okay. It sounds like we're gonna have to take it back to see if it actually could fall under the audit evaluations for this. So, I mean, the other option, Celeste, like you mentioned, is if we were to say it would be under the studies exemption, what would that mean? How would this study help improve instruction?
And I would think the discipline issue would, you could say that if there's less discipline problems, you've improved instruction for those students.
Any other comments from the board?
think I wanted, sorry, just, how do I phrase it? Maybe a clearer link between, students are identified by using proxies to, determine these are DACA students, and then connection of those students to juvenile crime and then discipline actions, because, I didn't view the purpose of DACA as any connection to juvenile crime or discipline action. So to me, it felt like a little stretch to make those two connections. So I don't know, it might be just myself. I don't know if other board members are thinking the same, but if it could speak on to that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that the way I'm thinking about it is that DACA, by having very specific eligibility criteria in order to get DACA, they have very strict criteria that have to be met. And I think there's some unintended consequences of putting this criteria on this program, right? So one of the criteria is that individuals cannot have committed crimes, right? So I'm thinking about potentially kids that are growing up before DACA didn't have the ability to get DACA. Whereas once DACA came rolled out, right, those kids that were growing up could have the potential of getting DACA. So we could see some behavioral changes in order to get DACA of them maybe committing less crimes, or because there is the educational requirements, right? Committing less or having less disciplinary actions against them, right? So in my mind, right, because of these criteria, I think that undocumented individuals may have seen some behavioral changes in order to meet this criteria in the future when they've become old enough to get DACA. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I mean,
Yeah, 'cause I would think, oh, I'm sorry, Yugi.
no, go ahead, Angie.
No, just especially with the part that you're looking at regarding school safety, if there is an incentive not to cause trouble enough that you would get something serious, suspension, expulsion, or an actual legal crime, if you lose your protection, is that an incentive that is a DACA restriction to, follow the rules more and not get into, behavioral offenses?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it as well. It's changing the incentives of both committing crimes and acting out in school, and it's de-incentivizing both of those things because they want to get DACA.
I may have just missed this, but could you explain the need or how the TWC data will be used, or how knowing that information is connected to your project?
Yeah, that's a good question. In economics, especially in a design like this, we want to make sure that the only difference between the treated group and the control group is their impact of DACA, right? But as I'm sure we're all aware, right? Students misbehaving and students committing crimes, they are very different students than students that don't. So when I was looking through the data, I included all sorts of data that I could potentially see a use for control in my specification, because we want to make sure that really the only difference between these two groups is DACA. And my thinking behind TWC is this is a little bit of a far-fetched control, but in my mind, I wanted to make sure that everything I could possibly control for is controlled for, right? And my thought process is the individuals that potentially got a job where they could get a visa are potentially different than those who get a job that didn't get a visa, and I wanted to control for potentially that longer term outcome to make sure again that the treatment and the control groups are really the same. And like I said, I just kind of thought about everything I could possibly control for, and that's why I included the TWC.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'll be able to use it for that. The
Okay.
only identifying field in that is social security number, and
Mhm.
by default, the DACA people wouldn't
Right.
have one.
Right. No, that makes sense.
So is that something that if that's not usable, do you want to remove that from the request?
Yeah, yeah, if that's possible.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments from the
Yeah,
board?
I'm just wondering, do schools or post-secondary institutions, I don't know the answer. Do they know who is a DACA recipient or not?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it varies a lot. Um, especially dependent on the colleges, dependent on the administrators registering the students for schools, things like that, right?
Mhm.
Especially like if we think about the nature of undocumented individuals, I mean, they don't want to necessarily be found out, right? Because they want to stay here. So, as far as disclosing a docket recipient status, I think that's a thing that varies widely on a case by case basis. So it's hard for me to say, and I don't know if there is an answer for on average, do they know? I know some colleges do uh, specifically market and say, you know, you're going to be safe here. We would like you to come here. I know some colleges don't have those types of policies in place. So I think it does vary very widely, which I know is probably not the answer that
Oh,
we
no,
would
I mean,
want,
I think
but
it's helpful. I was just thinking about like, again, I'm thinking about the practical implications of your research. So if school or if students don't want to reveal that they're a DACA recipient, right? Um, but you show evidence that DACA improves, like reduces juvenile delinquency. I'm just trying to understand, like, you know, I remember reading through your proposal and you said that maybe a potential implication would be to make juvenile policies more sensitive to DACA recipients or something of that nature? Or can you speak more to how what seems to be like a federal kind of policy, what could Texas policymakers do or, school officials do with your research? I'm always thinking about like, how can we use your research,
right,
to
right. And that's a good question. And I'm glad you brought it up. Because I kind of think of, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling
No,
with a
that's fine.
cold, so I'm a little snuffly right now. I kind of think of two separate kind of avenues for using this research, right? So the first is kind of more of a reaction to DACA, especially if certain changes happen to the program, how to support students, and to make sure that they still feel supported and safe. Um, the other avenue that I think is potentially more uh, tangible for Texas education is understanding how if a program has a benefit like DACA, right? So DACA has the benefit of protecting against deportation and getting temporary authorization for work. If having criteria explicitly stated to get that benefit does show an impact on behavior, that's a very important and interesting piece of information that I think can be leveraged in other similar policies, right? Obviously, DACA is a much more extreme policy, right? But I'm thinking of instead, like, for example, in a school, right? If there is some benefit that we can offer students, and in order to get that benefit, you have to have less than one suspension or things like that. Because I think the big contribution of this work is to really understand the salience of these criteria and how that salience potentially can impact their behavior. So I think in terms of benefits to and how this work can be used, I think those are the two main avenues that I'm thinking of. Is like student support and potentially using this information to better tailor disciplinary policies. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is a good way to go. I was just doing a quick Google search, and that program is not taking any more new applicants.
Yeah.
So it is allowing renewals, but that's only for people who've already been approved.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't kind of hang my hat on. This could show that this is a positive program to keep it going forward.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that what you were just explaining, I think that's the better thing to focus on is how it improves things like school disciplinary issues, positive educational outcomes, instead of more of this is good, so we should keep it going, since that may not happen.
Right. And I think I want to also clarify, building on Angie's point, right? And I know that Dr. Alexander and I had some conversations about this, especially with the current conversation around DACA and if it's going to continue, if it's not going to continue, and all of those things. I am viewing, and I actually saw a presentation about this, that the uncertainty about DACA does impact students. So I was going to actually look at only the treated years of 2012 to 2018 before of all of this conversation and all of this uncertainty happened.
That sounds good.
Yeah, because I didn't want that to be a confounding factor. And exactly like Angie was saying, that I want my real interest here is if a criteria based reward actually does impact student behavior.
Yeah, and I think that that could be an interesting finding, as opposed to getting too caught up in this specific program that may not
Right.
go forward.
Right. Yeah.
Other questions or comments from the board? If there are none, then do I have a motion to approve with the amendments to update the FERPA statement or change the FERPA statement and to remove the TWC data from the request?
Yeah,
This is Kathy. Go ahead, UT.
No, this is Angie. I'll move to
Oh,
approve
Angie.
those changes.
Sorry, Angie.
It's okay.
Can we count that?
It's Kathy. I second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Proposal 7, including remote access request UTD 222, college access and outcomes. We have someone here to talk about this project.
Hi, this is Lois Miller. I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina. So I'm here to talk about this work with Riley Acton, Kalina Cortez, and Camila Morales. So our project, as you can see here, is college access and outcomes. So we're really interested in how different groups in Texas can access higher education and how that affects their later outcomes as well. So our first kind of way of thinking about access is going to be through geographic access. So this proposal is actually building on 2 prior ERC projects that members of our research team have been working on. So in the past, we've had, it was project, I think, 195 that was using thinking about geographic access to colleges. And basically what we're trying to think about is how different groups live, closer or further, or attend high schools that are closer or further from different types of colleges that are available to them. And one of our main findings is, especially when we look at this differences in how different groups are affected by race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. What we find is that living in a community college desert, which we define as being 30 minutes or more from the nearest community college, for students who are white, Asian, or higher income, they tend to substitute away from community colleges and go to a four-year college instead and are more likely to get a bachelor's degree. Whereas students who are lower income, Black and Hispanic, actually, when they live further away from a community college, they just don't go to college at all. And so it actually decreases their probability of earning an associate's or a bachelor's degree. So that's kind of the main finding from our prior work. What we really want to do in this project is kind of expand on this in several ways. One is, first of all, to dig more into the specific educational pathways that students are taking, and particularly these different groups of students are taking. So thinking about both dual enrollment kind of possibilities, as well as, how students are moving through transferring between institutions and kind of accessing different types of colleges. We're also going to think about access to kind of specific types of colleges and degrees. So, in our prior work, we focused mostly just on, the two-year sector or the four-year sector, but we're interested looking in, do you live, further or attend high school closer or further from, let's say specifically like a selective four-year college or a two-year college that offers a certain major, and how does that affect your outcomes later on? And then finally, we're going to expand upon our prior work to kind of use a different methodology. In the prior work, where it was mostly descriptive, we want to use a different methodology, a difference in difference methodology, to get at the causal effect of having a community college kind of closer or further from your high school. The other project, prior ERC project that this is building on is my project, ERC 145, which is effects of transfer opportunities. And so the main findings from that paper are that for students who are kind of just barely getting admitted to four-year colleges as transfer students, so they're applying either from a two-year or from another four-year college, for those who are transferring from two-year to four-year, or from four-year non-flagships to the flagship colleges, if they're just barely admitted, compared to someone who wanted to transfer but was denied admission, the person who transfer actually ends up having negative earnings later on. So they're earning less than they would have if they had not transferred. That's kind of the main finding from my prior work. What we want to do in this project is connect it to our geographic access component to think about how does transfer interact with, where students, where they are among, the different available universities and colleges. Do we see more transfer, students maybe going further from their high schools or transferring closer to their high schools if maybe they moved further away at the beginning? And so we want to both do kind of a descriptive analysis to look at how does transfer behavior kind of compare to students and what they have available to them, their proximity to different types of colleges. And then also, expanding upon the methodology that I used in the prior ERC project, Project 145, that's using a regression discontinuity design to say what is the effect of transfer on students' educational outcomes, whether they earn a bachelor's degree, as well as their earnings later on as well. And so we're going to use that kind of methodology to say, how do we maybe look at different heterogeneous effects, thinking about students who are transferring maybe further from their hometown, which is going to be proxied by their high school location. Across both of, all of these different questions of access, we're going to be really interested in differences in groups, in effects across groups of students, particularly this race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, which we found this interesting heterogeneity, in our prior work and want to continue to explore in this future project. In terms of benefits to Texas from this work, I think one of the main things when we're thinking about the geographic access is that, higher education deserts are a kind of policy issue that a lot of policymakers are interested in. And our work can kind of inform, if policymakers are thinking about where to locate certain colleges, maybe what colleges they're going to close down or merge, our work can kind of shine some light on what types of students is that likely to affect and how is that going to affect their educational trajectories, as well as their earnings later on. You can also think about maybe some lighter touch policies that aren't exactly like opening a new college, but maybe improving transportation for rural students or something like that. And our work can kind of show how that might have some positive effects on students' educational attainment and maybe their earnings. And then, also thinking about transfer policy. So this can be thought of at a college level or at a state level. How might we want to ease these transfers between the sectors that students are experiencing? If I'm finding these negative effects, kind of fully digging more into this and connecting it to the geographic piece can help us understand what are maybe some policies that could support transfer students better or try to inform them better so that they don't end up having these negative outcomes of transfer. And then finally, we're also going to be exploring as one of the kind of specific types of colleges and degrees that I was talking about before. We're interested in community colleges, that is two-year public colleges that offer bachelor's degrees. So there's been this recent trend of community colleges, which primarily only offer up to associates, have started offering bachelor's degrees in some specific fields. And so this is a pretty new credential that we're interested in understanding what are the effects of that and how do employers kind of view that in the market. So do we see that students who get a bachelor's degree from a community college, how do their earnings later on compare to a students who got a bachelor's degree from a more traditional four-year college or who got an associate's degree from a community college? So that's kind of quick overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments from the board, from the researcher? I do have tiny thing just to make it super clear in the FERPA statement that it's for improving instruction under the studies. I mean, the write-up was, I appreciated the write-up of explaining it, but just want to make sure it's clear.
Okay, sure, thank you.
Yeah, basically introducing the term instruction in the FERPA statement.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Maybe just a quick comment as you're looking at as you're diving into the bachelor's degrees offered at community colleges. It'll be interesting to see because the distinctions, right, are in expectations, I believe, are differentiate a bachelor's degree coming from a four-year institution from a community college, especially around core. Is what I think is the largest distinction, but this is not my deep knowledge base. So I think it'll I look forward to seeing what you find in that, just because I'll be interested in how you create comparisons and then seek to understand them.
Yeah, thank you. We're kind of interested in two different types of comparisons from the community college bachelor's. One would be to think about a similar community college or even the same community college that offers an associate's in the same field. So if you're thinking about maybe an associate's in nursing versus a bachelor's in nursing that's being offered from the two-year college. And then the other will be comparing it to more of a traditional four-year bachelor's degree, probably from like a more open access, non-selective four-year college.
Yeah, yeah, such an interesting space, not for this conversation. So
thank you. Thanks.
No. Great. Any other questions or comments? If there aren't any, do I have a motion to approve with the amendment to add specifics to the FERPA statement?
This is Kathy. I move to approve with amendment to the FERPA.
This is Holly. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Okay. So the next one I have to do in kind of a different order. So because we tabled it, and this is the way that works, is first, can I have a motion to reconsider the prior tabled project? Is that helpful? Okay.
Yes, this is Kathy. I motion that we reconsider the tabled project.
And I'll second Celeste.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right. Now we're going to talk about proposal 11, including remote access requests, UTA 254, the consequences of educational and criminal sanctions on student outcomes. We have a researcher here to talk to us about this one.
Yep, I'm gonna do it. Hi everyone. Great to see you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to reconsider this proposal. It's really great to be here. I'm Emily Weisburst. This is joint work with Steve Mello, Elisa Hakame, Felipe Gonsalves, and Eric Chin. And so as a reminder, this project was reviewed during the last ERC board meeting. And the members asked that we revise the proposal to address a few different questions and concerns. So what I thought I might do is briefly give an overview of the project and its aims, and then I'll discuss some of the issues raised during the last meeting and address each of those. So first, I just want to remind the group about our project focus, which is studying the impact of in-school and out-of-school sanctions, including criminal arrests, on students' educational and economic outcomes. So school discipline and juvenile arrests are quite common in Texas, yet their education and economic effects remain insufficiently studied. So for example, in the 2018 school year, there were over 1 million in-school suspensions, 400,000 out-of-school suspensions, and 80,000 referrals to alternative disciplinary programs. And at the same time, there was approximately 700 youth per 100,000 adolescents were arrested for serious offenses and criminal arrests, which is about almost 1% of the adolescent population. And these sanctions disproportionately impact students of color and those with disabilities, which raises concerns about fairness, effectiveness, and also long-term implications for disparities. And our research seeks to examine both the impact of these school-based disciplinary actions and juvenile arrests on students' academic and economic trajectories. And so specifically, we're interested in how school discipline and arrests influence high school graduation, college enrollment, future employment, and involvement with the criminal justice system. And so we're going to investigate which students, in addition to kind of estimating average impacts, we're also interested in which student populations are most affected, and whether certain school or community resources can mitigate negative outcomes, including things like guidance counselors. And we plan to leverage the statewide data from the ERC to study differences in the effects of sanctions, including both across sanction type as well as across different school districts and neighborhoods with varying characteristics. So in the last meeting, there were kind of two big issues that were identified that we really worked to clarify in the proposal. So the first one was about needing to expand and clarify the proposed research benefits to Texas, which I'll talk about first. The second were questions about methodology and scope, and in particular, how and why we plan to use teacher data in our analysis. So I'll talk about that second. And feel free to interrupt me at any point if that would be easier, since I know you guys have heard a lot of this already and read the proposal. So for benefits to Texas, this is something that we've worked on substantially, but we want to highlight kind of different ways that our results can inform potential reforms or adjustments to policies through both different stakeholders and decision makers in Texas. And I'll highlight a few of those areas. Just to remind the group, what we're doing is we're really interested in what the impact of these disciplinary actions are. And so we see those, and also criminal arrests, we see those effects, which we don't know what they will be, as informing both what disciplinary actions kind of guidelines should be, sort of how those might change depending on what we find, and also whether there is a potential benefit to further study and provide supports for affected students. So those are kind of the two general avenues. So first, I want to talk about different stakeholders here. At the state level, this is something that the state legislature has been involved with, which is guidelines for school discipline. And the results that we have, which will look at sanction types, may inform some of these policies. So examples of recent amendments to kind of statewide policy for discipline include things like banning the use of out-of-school suspension for children kindergarten through second grade, as well as more recently creating harsher school discipline policies for the distribution and possession of e-cigarette and vaping devices, which was in 2023. So this is something that the state gets involved in with some frequency. And so I think that our results may be informative at that level. Then also school districts and school level policymakers also have a lot of discretion over how to enforce and implement disciplinary codes locally. And these are frequently adjusted and reformed as well. And there, again, our findings about impacts may be informative for adjustments. So for example, an example of a recent change is Dallas ISD created in-school reset centers, which are designated areas where students go as an alternative to out-of-school suspensions that provides kind of social and emotional support for the students who are being sanctioned rather than just having them be out of school. So that's kind of one change that is kind of moving around these disciplinary codes. More broadly, one of the things we're interested in looking at is how the effects that we may find will vary by school district. And so one hypothesis, although this may or may not be the case, is that disciplinary actions may have negative effects on the disciplined students. And that's sort of informed by the descriptive patterns that we've seen in other studies. If that's the case, if we can find sort of identify districts that have less negative consequences for disciplined students, this will allow us to highlight kind of districts that are performing better with their discipline policies. And there may be an opportunity to learn from those districts for other districts in the state as well. So that's another thing that we plan to look at. And then just more generally, regardless of the stakeholder, depending on what we find, our work may provide some insights about the potential benefits of providing supports for students who are returning or transitioning to school after a disciplinary action or an arrest. So one of the things that we have included in the proposal, which I think is quite interesting, is that police, local law enforcement are required to inform public schools of arrests involving enrolled students in public schools. And so this is a population that a school should know about. And there's also programs that are, or plans that are supposed to be in place for students who are returning from DAEP or JJAEP programs that involve transition meetings and reincorporation into schools. But some reports have found that these have been lacking in their compliance in several districts across the state. So this is something where this is supposed to be in place, but our work may provide kind of evidence that this needs to be more strictly enforced. And there's been also kind of some recent task force reports about the need for additional mental and behavioral health services. And this is a population that potentially could benefit from some targeted supports. And then lastly, I'll just also mention that one of the things we're interested in studying as an outcome is the impact of arrests and also disciplinary actions on future enrollment in higher education, which we outline in the proposal. And so several higher education programs in Texas ask students to provide information on criminal history and their application materials. And one of the things that we're interested in studying is whether this is a potential barrier to entry for students who are interested in college who may have an arrest record. And that also may inform potential adjustments to these kinds of admissions requirements, which are often called ban-the-box style policies about criminal records. So that's kind of an overview of the additions that we've made and specifics to the benefits to Texas. I also want to discuss the methods piece, which was another concern. But again, feel free to interject if you have any comments along the way. So for the methods, I just want to briefly overview our primary empirical strategy and also clarify how and why we are interested in using teacher data for this project. So one of the things that I think needed more clarity in the proposal that we have revised is that we are using teacher information from the ERC as part of our methodological design, but we're not interested in evaluating teacher behavior or identifying different teachers or estimating specific teacher effects. So that's not the focus. We're using it as a methodological tool for our empirical strategy. So our objective is to compare students who are disciplined or arrested to students who are not, where we ideally want these comparison groups to be otherwise similar. And we know that these groups of students are not typically the same. So the way that we plan to do this is by looking at students who are exposed to different teachers who tend to discipline at higher or lower rates. So one thought experiment you can think about is a comparison between a student who's disciplined because they happen to be exposed to a teacher who's disciplining at higher rates to a similar student who's not disciplined because they're exposed to a teacher who's disciplining at lower rates. And in most analyses, we're going to hold fixed. So this is going to be an instrumental variable strategy, and we're going to hold fixed student grade, cohort, school district, and we're going to examine the variation between students who are exposed to different teachers. So we're going to be using these teacher discipline propensities as a measure of students' likelihood of exposure to discipline. But this exposure measure is going to be aggregated and anonymized, and it's also going to be constructed at the student level, sometimes averaging across students, across teachers that a student has. And so it's not going to be possible to identify a particular teacher's effect in any of the analysis that we do, and that's not our focus. So our goal is to create a variable basically that shifts the likelihood of student discipline, but not to evaluate any individual teachers or estimate teacher-specific effects. And we're not interested in policies that inform changes in teacher behaviors or teacher-specific policies either. So our analysis will basically instead give an estimate of the average effect of a disciplinary action on students, and this is going to inform whether different types of discipline are more productive than others, or whether there are effects for different student subgroups that are stronger or for certain types of school districts. And I also want to note that the design that we have for the criminal arrest piece of this project is going to use a very similar design, but there we're going to use Texas Highway Patrol officers in a sample of individuals who are stopped by police, some of whom are arrested. And there we're going to use the officer information as a methodological tool where we're going to be estimating the effect of an arrest and doing this based on exposure to officers who have higher or lower propensities to arrest individuals. And then lastly, I just want to raise a more minor question, which is one question that was raised in our last meeting, was how we plan to attribute discipline practices of teachers to students, and particularly in higher grades when students may have multiple teachers over different subject courses. And so here we're going to try to test a few different strategies to deal with this. One is to average over kind of the full set of teachers that a student has. And here we're going to be looking at which strategies will give us the most predictive power. Another is to just restrict attention to disciplinary actions that happen in earlier grades when a student only has one teacher. And then a final strategy, which I think is pretty promising, is to focus on core subjects like English and math and the teachers that are linked to students for those subjects. And this is a strategy that has been used in recent research by Kiribo Jackson in 2018. And he finds strong predictive effects using this strategy of looking at just the core teachers where students may have higher exposure to those instructors. So I'll just close because I think that all of this is related to the FERPA statement, which has come up for several of the other projects today. And we are claiming the instruction exemption. And the reasoning is that while school discipline is often viewed separately from instruction, it's a prevalent feature of the school experience. And if discipline may have the potential to affect student performance in important ways. And we think that by identifying the impacts of discipline on students, we're going to learn more about how discipline and educational outcomes interact that could help to inform instructional improvements for the student population. So we're really interested in your questions and feedback.
Thank you so much for the clear walkthrough of what has changed since the last one. It's really helpful. Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I've noticed you still have listed that you want to use from the wage data, the county code fields, but those are not reliable. They don't show the actual employment county or residence county. So do not use either of those fields.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you so much for that note.
And Emily, I just want to iterate, if board were to approve the proposal, it doesn't mean that all the data elements that you listed in the supplemental data files are being approved as well. It's separate. It will supplemental data will go through another review, and then we'll be sure to communicate with you and the other researchers about, each data element.
Okay, that's really helpful to know from a process perspective. It's something we're actively working on, is preparing the supplemental data. I'll note that for the disciplinary actions piece, we don't need any supplemental data.
Right.
It's for the criminal arrest part where we want to bring in all of the highway patrol information and the individuals who are stopped and arrested by police.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions, comments from the board? Again, you've already spoken to this when you were talking, but just for documentation, if in the purpose statement, you can put like under studies for improved instruction. It states studies, but not specifically improve instruction. So
okay,
just need to add that. And then, but I appreciate the thorough write-up of explaining how it fits. It was really helpful. The other thing we noted, you might want to request the CBM OC1. Is that what for the higher ed data?
Okay.
Which is another, after 2012, some of the schools use the OC1 for enrollment rather than the 001. So we suggest you add that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, there aren't any. Then do I have a motion to approve with the amendments to add the OC1, CBM OC1, and give specifics on the purpose statement?
And move to approve.
Second.
The approval, Megan.
That's Megan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thanks so much for all your work.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to reconsider. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, next item, consultation with legal counsel. Oh, I have. All right, we will now take up item 6, consultation with legal counsel to receive legal advice. The advisory board will meet in a closed meeting to deliberate the following matters pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071 and 551.129. The advisory board will meet in closed session to engage in consultation with legal counsel to receive legal advice. No other business of the advisory board will be discussed. After this discussion, we will reconvene in open session. It is now 3:03 p.m. we will convene executive session. Advisory board members will now move to room number 12.101A for the closed meeting. Board members attending virtually, please remain on the Zoom call while we assign you to the breakout room. Please be patient with us as we are assigning you to the breakout room. You'll see a pop-up message asking you to join the virtual breakout, and you'll be moved as soon as you click join breakout. Thank you. Yes. Oh, do we just mute here? We mute you. Okay, can you all hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I am in the room. Let's see. The time is 3:57 p.m. The advisory board is now reconvened in open session and a quorum is present. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.